Let's jump to the hill country of Ephraim and Samaria. The reason I call it the hill country of Ephraim and Samaria is because once you move north of the hill country of Judah, remember Judah included Benjamin there at the top where the Benjamin Plateau is. So it's really Judah and Benjamin. And just north of Benjamin is Ephraim. And then basically what we're going to call the hills of Samaria. And the name Samaria came from the capital that eventually was settled as the final capital of the northern tribe. So here we go, the hill country of Ephraim and Samaria. We ended up down here at Mizpah yesterday, the halfway point between Dan and Beersheba, as it were. It's where the tribes met quite often at the very northern part of the Benjamin Plateau. That was Mizpah. Now we're going to move up to Bethel and on north all the way up to the Ezreelan Valley. That's what we're calling the hill country of Ephraim and Samaria. The hill country of Ephraim and Samaria is similar to that of Judah topographically, with maybe two somewhat small distinctions. First, the hill country of Ephraim and Samaria does not have a Shephelah to the west. I guess in my mind, that's a pretty big distinction. There's no Shephelah in the western part of the hills of Samaria, making access from the coast more difficult. There's no buffer zone in there that kind of eases you from the coast into the hill country. You go right from the coast into those more rugged hills, which makes Samaria more defensible, more secure in a way, but it makes it a little more difficult as far as travel, as communication is concerned. So as we look at our map, we see the hill country of Ephraim Samaria up here with no Shephelah to the west, and we see the hill country of Judah with the Shephelah. If you look at the hill country of Judah here, very clearly we have some low hills here that lead up to the ridge, and very clearly in Samaria here we have no Shephelah to the west. So that's one distinction. The second distinction is that the watershed ridge becomes quite indistinct in the hills of Ephraim. North of Bethel, in Judah, you have a pretty clear ridge down there from Hebron, Bethlehem, Jerusalem, up to the Benjamin Plateau. But once you get north of Bethel and you start to head farther north up to the northern part of Samaria, where the capital was, you begin to lose that ridge. It becomes less distinct. Things are going to drop more down into, perhaps little depressions, and then eventually going to drop down into a very deep valley, heading up to where the capital of the northern tribes was. So we're going to lose our watershed ridge, and travel becomes a little more depression or valley oriented as we head north of Bethel. There's Bethel and the south part of our map. That's where we're going to start, just north of Mizpah. We're going to start at Bethel and move north. And by the time we get up here, especially to Lebonah, everything is going to drop down into a deep valley here that's going to head on up toward the valley of Jezreel. And our watershed ridge is pretty much lost at that point in time. So those are the two distinctions. No Shephelah over here to the west, and basically no ridge the farther north that you get. All right, so let's start down back toward Mizpah again, just north of Mizpah, and the Benjamin Plateau is the Bethel Plateau. Another little plateau, distinct from Benjamin, but similar to Benjamin. And then we'll move into the hills of Ephraim. This is the inheritance area of Ephraim. The Bethel Plateau is slightly higher than, but much smaller than the Benjamin Plateau. There's the Benjamin Plateau we looked at yesterday, remember, with Ramah there in the very middle of the clock, so to speak. And Mizpah at 12 o'clock. Now we're moving north to what we're calling the Bethel Plateau. The only city there we're going to look at is Bethel. It's another flattened area that's smaller than Benjamin, but it defines a particular region as you move into Ephraim. The Bethel Plateau is accessed from all directions via the hills and valleys of Ephraim, making it somewhat similar to the Benjamin Plateau, but not nearly. These roads to access the Bethel Plateau are not nearly as significant and important. They're not interstates, they're kind of regional, let's say U.S. highways, or maybe even county roads. It's somewhat similar to Benjamin, but not as important and strategic as the Benjamin Plateau. It is, as I say here, less proximate and less accessible to Jerusalem and to the world at large, so not nearly as significant. Here is the Bethel Plateau as it would look on our map. It's that little tiny circle right there around Bethel. Access from the north and the south via what we're going to still call the ridge route, the watershed ridge route, though that, as I said, becomes less distinct north of Bethel. And then also access from the east, the Jordan Rift, and from the west, from the Joppa area, really from Aphek, via these county roads, let's say, that are leading up from those areas. So it is accessible from all directions, but not nearly as strategic and not nearly as easily accessible. We'll say it that way. The hills of Ephraim, here again, is why we call it Ephraim and Samaria, technically Ephraim and Manasseh, because Manasseh was inherited the area north of Ephraim before we get too deep into the valley of Ezreelon. But the hills of Ephraim and the Bethel Plateau. Strangely enough, I guess, in my mind, the location of Bethel is debated. There are two sites that contend for the location of Bethel, and in my mind and my teachers have gone back and forth from one to the other. I'm not completely convinced of one or the other. One of my teachers will teach me it's one location and it's like, okay, I'll go with that one. And I've actually had the other one on my slides here. And then another guy I'll talk to who has studied the issue says, no, it's really this one. And so actually right before this class, I switched to the other location. So those of you here who have a particular opinion on that, forgive me, but if the scholars who study it can't figure it out, I'm not going to worry too much about it. And they're very close to each other. Bethel is located, wherever it is, about 12 miles north of Jerusalem. And it overlooks the Bethel Plateau and the central north-south ridge route. Bethel is named, this is really interesting, Bethel is named in the Old Testament more than any city except Jerusalem. I mean, its history is so significant. It's still interesting to me that they're not for certain exactly which of the two locations is Bethel, but it is a very important city biblically, and of course we all know that. Bethel has ties with Abraham, Jacob, Deborah, Samuel, Jeroboam, and Elisha. As I say, the location of Bethel is debated, possibly situated at the site of the modern village of Beittin. So the location I'm choosing for this class is Beittin, and that long has laid claim to the location of Bethel. And as you can see, the Arabic name there is very similar to Bethel, which is one of the claims to the location. So on our map, on this map at least, I have both locations here. Here's Beittin on this hill right here, which I'm going to call Bethel. The alternate location is El Birah down here. I'm guessing those two locations are maybe a mile apart. They're not very far apart. But I'm choosing the northern one, Beittin, the modern little village, Arab village of Beittin, is what I'm going to call Bethel for our class purposes. There are the two locations very close to each other. So there's Bethel on our map overlooking the Bethel Plateau. Here's the little village, the Arab village, the city of Beittin. The last time I drove by it and shot a picture of it. Very nearby the middle of that city up toward the top of the hill are some ruins that they are going to equate with the antiquity of Beittin and perhaps the location of Bethel. There's an interesting verse in Genesis, a few verses in Genesis 12, and here's what they say. Abraham passed through the land. Abraham is coming down from Ur of the Chaldees, coming down from the north into the land of promise, as God told him, wherever the sole of your feet touch, that will become your property. And he began to pass through the land as far as the site of Shechem. We're going to be looking at Shechem in just a minute. It's up there remember, north of Lebonah. Everything drops down into a valley, and right in that valley is Shechem. So he's up there just north of Lebonah, and he's passing through the land. He's passing by Shechem. The Canaanite was in the land. The Lord appeared to Abraham and said, to your descendants I will give this land. He built an altar there to the Lord who had appeared to him. Then he proceeded from there. I love these kind of verses. I mean, you've read them before, but it's like, I don't understand all of this. But then he proceeded from there to the mountain on the east of Bethel, pitched his tent with Bethel on the west and Ai on the east. I mean, so the Lord is even telling us in the scriptures where these places are compared to other places. That's very helpful to us, although, again, we don't know exactly where Bethel is. But he pitched his tent east of Bethel. Bethel is on the west, Ai on the east, on a hill, on a mountain east of Bethel. West of Ai, he built an altar to the Lord and called upon the name of the Lord, and he journeyed on toward the Negev. The Negev is way down there in the south of Hebron. So, there is a site called Abraham's Hill. Here's Bethel. And here's Ai, which also is debated, which we'll talk about in a minute. And there is a hill in between, which is called Abraham's Hill. And they have, obviously that hill is pretty easy to find if you know where Bethel is, you think you know, and where Ai is, you think you know. And there's a hill, and there's a very ancient tradition that this is Abraham's Hill. And there are the ruins of an old church site. Even back in the day, they built churches over the sites where these biblical events theoretically happened. So that's Abraham's Hill. Ai was just mentioned east of Bethel, and that location, unfortunately, is also debated. And I have gone back and forth from both of those locations. Ai protected the Bethel Plateau from the east. Remember, you can access the plateau from every direction. And now Ai is protecting the Bethel Plateau from the Jordan River area from the east. It's near the intersection of two routes that came up either side of the Wadi Makuk. We talked about the Wadi Makuk yesterday, and Geba and Michmash, right? The exact location of Ai is debated. The site of Et Tel is the one I am choosing for this class to map. It's the one that actually I was first taught. More recently, within the last, 15 years, a very conservative biblical archaeologist discovered another site, which he believed, it's El Makatir, he believed was Ai, debated again, and Et Tel, the older site, suggested for Ai is the one that I'm selecting for this class, for better or worse, in your opinion, if you have an opinion. So here is Ai, or Et Tel, on our map, just east of Bethel. And again, here we are down here, Bethel, and Ai is actually this little dot by the Wadi Shaban, which runs down into the Wadi Makuk. And you'll notice here's the wadi. Remember, wadi is the Arabic word for a dry riverbed. It's only full when it's raining. But here's a road going on either side from Jericho down in the rift. On either side of this extensive wadi system, the Wadi Makuk, north of Wadi Makuk or south of Wadi Makuk, both leading up here to Ai, and then on to the Bethel Plateau, right? So there's Ai. You can see this deep wadi system on our map. right here. Jericho is just off of our map down here in the corner, and a road that went on both sides of the Wadi system up to Ai. The southern one is the one that divided off past Michmash, across the pass to Geba, and on up to the Benjamin Plateau. But all of that's giving us access to the watershed ridge from the Jordan River, and in this case up to Ai. By the way, let me back up a minute. I mean, if these roads are leading from Jericho to Ai, right? When Jericho fell, what was next? Ai. So now we see that connection. We see why Ai has to be conquered before you can go on up to the ridge and conquer those other cities and gain access to the north-south route. From Jericho, you have to conquer Ai before you get to the top of the ridge. And we'll look at that battle here in just a second. Ai was conquered by Joshua after the fall of Jericho. Let's look at the second phase of that battle. Why the second phase? What happened, class, the first phase? Israel was defeated. Why? Achan took stuff from Jericho that he shouldn't have taken. He violated what's called the ban. That's where my 3-hour lecture has to do with why did they exterminate all these people. But what happened to Achan and his family is what was supposed to happen to Jericho and the Canaanites, to be exterminated, men, women, children, everybody. Achan violated that ban, that law to exterminate everybody and everything and destroy it all. He took some of that, and so that curse, that ban, fell on him and his family, and he and his family were destroyed just like Jericho was supposed to be. And until that happened, Israel would not succeed. So Israel found out that Achan had violated the ban. Israel put Achan under the ban. They destroyed him and his family. And now they're going to fight Ai again, the second time. So let's look at that second battle against Ai. Very interesting defense. Joshua 8, the Lord said to Joshua, "Don't fear or be discouraged. You lost once, but now you've taken care of the problem. Let's take all the army and go up again, a second time, against Ai. Behold, I've given the king of Ai into your hand with his people, his city, his land. This time, the second time, set an ambush against the city behind it." Let's trick them. And let's have a military strategy here that's going to fool them into thinking they can defeat us again, but we're going to defeat them. So Joshua rose early in the morning. He mustered the army. He went up against Ai, he and the elders of Israel, before the people. Now all the fighting men who were with him went up and drew near before the city and encamped on the north side of Ai, with a valley between them and Ai. I love these geographical references. So there's a valley between Israel and Ai. They're encamping on the north side. Here's Ai at Tel, and what's just north of there? A valley. And what's on the other side? A hill. So now, assuming this is the location of Ai, by the way, the other location of Ai is, again, very close, and it's basically the same kind of scenario. So here comes Israel. They set up a camp on this hill north of Ai across the valley, but there's something else going on here. By the way, we're standing, let me back up a minute. We're going to stand on this hill in this next slide, and we're going to look across the valley at Tel Ai. So let's stand where the Israelites did, and we look across the valley, and right on the top of this hill, I think I have an arrow, there we go, or a circle, is Tel Ai, the very top of that hill. By the way, I always say when you're standing somewhere looking at something, don't just look at that, look at everything around that. And if you look in the distance on the horizon at the upper left horizon, over here, you will see 3 towers. Those 3 towers always tell you that you're looking at the Mount of Olives. The Mount of Olives in Jerusalem can be seen from the hill where Israelite camped to come up against Ai. All right? So here's Israel's camp. Here's Ai, verse 12. Now Joshua had taken about 5,000 men and had set them in ambush between Bethel and Ai to the west of the city. So Israel's camped here as though they're going to fight again against Ai, but he sent some men up the other side of the wadi, and there's a very deep valley right here between Bethel and Ai, and 5,000 men snuck down into this valley between Bethel and Ai, behind Ai, and Ai has no idea that they're back there ready to pounce. Let's take an aerial view and look at that valley. I want to show you that deep ravine. Here it is. Ai is off our picture, barely off our picture to the left. Bethel is kind of over our right shoulder. So Israel's camp is across to the north. Bethel is over our right shoulder here, and we're looking right down this valley, very deep valley, where the ambush is set. Behind Ai. Nobody knows they're there. Let's move a little bit to our right, again, in our airplane view, so to speak, and we're going to look down that valley. I just want to show you how deep that thing is. Here's a road, and that may be a vehicle down there on it, but just so you have an idea how deep this valley is. I mean, they snuck up from Jericho down this deep valley, and there's 5,000 guys hiding here, ready to come out and ambush Ai from the back. As soon as the king of Ai saw Israel's camp over there on the north side, the men of the city of Ai went out toward the Arabah, that is toward the Jordan Rift, to meet Israel in battle, but he did not know that there was an ambush behind the city in this deep valley. Joshua, all Israel pretended to be beaten before them. They fled in the direction of the wilderness, that dry area down toward Jericho. They're fleeing again, like they did in the previous battle. They're pretending to be defeated. And we're looking now from Ai, from Et-Tel. Israel's camp was across the valley there, and Israel is now under attack, and they're fleeing toward, again, the wilderness, this dry, barren area down toward Jericho. There's the Jordan Rift right there. They're running away as though they're being defeated. So all of the men who were in Ai called to pursue Israel. As they pursued Joshua, they were lured away from the city. There they go, chasing Israel. And the men in the ambush rose quickly out of their place. They ran and entered the city and captured it. And they hurried to set the city on fire. So when the men of Ai looked back, and behold, the smoke of the city went up to heaven, Joshua and Israel saw the ambush had captured the city, that the smoke of the city went up. They turned back and struck down the men of Ai. And now the men of Ai, and actually men had come out from Bethel as well, are trapped between Israel, who's turned back to fight against them, and the ambush guys who've burned the city, and Ai is defeated. The nation of Israel goes on to destroy Ai, as they were told to do with Jericho, and Ai now is defeated, and Israel has access to Watershed Ridge. Okay, I probably shouldn't do this, but I'm going to do it. So, what happens next in the Bible in the account of the conquest? We've defeated Jericho, now we've defeated Ai, and the very next story is the Gibeonites pretend to be from a far country and make a league. Remember the Benjamin Plateau yesterday? Ramah was in the middle. What was on the western side? What was at 9 o'clock on the Benjamin Plateau? It was Gibeon. Okay, so Jericho has fallen. They hear about that in Gibeon, right? They have CNN. They know what's going on. Jericho has fallen. Ai defeated Israel. Okay, we're saved. No problem. Wait, Israel attacked Ai again. Wait, Ai now has fallen. They're coming up the ridge. They want to conquer the watershed. Who's next? We're next. Let's put on old clothes. Let's get old wineskins. Let's go down to Israel from a different way and say we're from a far country and they're going to make a league with us. There's more scripture behind that story, but I don't have time to tell it. But that now we know why the Gibeonites tricked Joshua into making a league with them. They are next in line. It's just like when Assyria came up and they left their stuff at Michmash and they camped overnight at Geba. What happened? Ramah trembled, Gibeah of Saul fled. Now we see why those dots are connected. All right. Let's move from Bethel and Ai to Ophrah, or Ephraim, later called Tirzah. Ophrah overlooked the route leading from the Jordan Rift to the ridge as it went north toward Shiloh. So remember, we have two roads coming around the Wadi Makuk, right? The northern one does come around the Wadi and go to Ai, but it also continues farther north if you want to go up to Shiloh. This northern Wadi Makuk road goes right past Ophrah to the watershed very near Shiloh, Ophrah or Ephraim. Here it is on our map. There's Jericho, by the way. This whole thing here is the Wadi Makuk, and the road is coming up on both sides of it to Ai, but the northern one continues on to Ophrah and the watershed and is going to head up toward Shiloh. There's our watershed road, and here's our road from Jericho around the north side of the Wadi Makuk, right next to Ophrah. Ophrah was possessed by the Philistines when Jonathan fought them. Remember, he went down the cliff and up the other side. Ophrah was involved in that battle. Absalom killed his half-brother Amnon here because of his violation of Tamar. We'll look a little bit at that story in 2 Samuel 13. Abijah, son of Rehoboam, took this region from Jeroboam. And most interesting to me, letter E, Jesus retired here after raising Lazarus from the dead. You know, what happens when he raises Lazarus from the dead? Well, everybody hears about that. Everybody wants to see him. Everybody wants to meet him. And his crucifixion is very near. And before his crucifixion, he gets away from the crowds for a little while by coming up here to Ophrah, or at that time called Ephraim. We're standing on Tel Ai, and we're looking toward the north, and Ephraim is up there on a very high hill. You can see it from all over the place. There's Ophrah, or Ephraim. We're standing now on Gibeah of Saul. Remember King Hussein of Jordan's unfinished palace? We're actually standing on the second floor of his house, and I have a telephoto, granted, but Geba and Michmash is off of our picture here. Geba is right here. And I show you that because off in the distance, I mean, here we're standing on Gibeah of Saul, where his palace was, and we can see not only Geba, we see Ophrah there in the distance. The road coming up next to Ophrah is leading up to Shiloh on the watershed ridge. Here's a closer shot of that city on a hill, Ophrah or Ephraim. Jesus stayed here for probably a few days. Right next to Ophrah, nearby, is Baal-Hazor. It's a very high hill, 4,000 feet. Now we're even higher than Hebron was 3,000 something. Baal-Hazor, a very high hill overlooking the same route as Ophrah, between Ophrah and Shiloh. And again, it's not a terribly important thing. I mention it for two reasons. It's easily seen from all kinds of places. You can stand on Nevi Samuel and you can very easily see Baal-Hazor, which is near Shiloh. It keeps you oriented to everything. This is also involved in Absalom's slaying of Amnon. Occurred near here, Baal-Hazor and Ophrah, or Ephraim. Here it is. I have it as a circle because it's more, in my mind, about the mountain than it is the town. But once again, it's on that road coming from Jericho around the north side of the Wadi Makuk, past Ophrah, Baal-Hazor up here, heading towards Shiloh and the northern part of the hill country of Samaria. There's Jericho, and there is Baal-Hazor along that road that's heading up toward the watershed. Very high hill. We are standing on Nevi Samuel, and this high hill right here is Baal-Hazor. So we know that Shiloh is very close. to that, as well as Ophrah, as we said. Here's a close-up of Baal-Hazor. Here's a road right here. Here's the road that you would travel. Let's see if there's any cars. I don't see any cars to give us a perspective, but you see the size of the road. Here's some houses. Huge high hill. You see antennas and these kind of, I don't know, they remind me of Doppler kind of things. I think a lot of this is military stuff. You don't ask about it. In fact, they used to not let you take pictures of stuff like that, but now, Google tells you where everything is. In any case, there are sheep pasturing up there. Still today, in the rainy season, when you do get some grass, you can pasture your sheep there. And here's 2 Samuel 13. When David heard that Amnon had violated Tamar, he was angry. But Absalom spoke to Amnon neither good nor bad, for Absalom hated Amnon. He's not angry, he's seething. I need to get back at him because he violated his sister Tamar. After 2 years, Absalom had sheep shearers at Baal-Hazor, which is near Ephraim. That's why I mentioned those two places. And what are they doing? They're shearing sheep. We just saw sheep pasturing at Baal-Hazor. Absalom invited all the king's sons. Absalom commanded his servants, mark when Amnon's heart is merry with wine, strike Amnon and kill him. The servants of Absalom did so to Amnon as Absalom had commanded. That's happening here near Ophrah and Baal-Hazor. So, again, all of these little stories in the Bible are, lived out in a region where very similar things are still happening. The raising, grazing, and shearing of sheep in this region. All right, let's get up to Shiloh. These are more important biblical cities, and Shiloh is a fascinating place. It's situated just east of the main watershed ridge route. It's just a little bit off of the ridge route to the east, slightly east off of that ridge route. Now we're about 20 miles north of Jerusalem. The river Shiloh, the Nahal Shiloh, with its numerous tributaries, the Shiloh system, I call it, runs off the western side of the watershed ridge. So you have Shiloh sitting just east of the ridge, then you've got the ridge, then you've got this Shiloh system running, collecting water and running down toward the sea, the Mediterranean Sea, very near Aphek and the Yarkon River. Okay, so now we know east and west about where we are. The Shiloh system is running down there toward the Yarkon and Aphek, which we studied on day 1. Here's Shiloh. Notice it's just east of the watershed. Here's the Shiloh system running down here toward Aphek and feeding the Yarkon River, which is causing everything, to coalesce at Aphek and head on up to the Esdraelon Valley. Trying to tie all this together. Shiloh, all right? Here's Shiloh on our map. There's the watershed ridge. And this is, notice, this amazing kind of mess here of the Shiloh system. Heading down to, there it is, Aphek. All right. The tabernacle was set up at Shiloh during the eras of Joshua and Samuel. This is where the worship of the Lord took place in the days of Joshua, Samuel, Eli, the whole Samuel story. Remember, Samuel was born and buried in Ramah at the middle of our clock in the Benjamin Plateau. But his mother eventually, when he was weaned, brought him up here to Shiloh to live with Eli, to serve with Eli. And Samuel, of course, became a very important priest and prophet and judge. The ark remained here until its capture by the Philistines. And we've looked at that story. It was brought down from Shiloh to the Battle of Aphek, which is right there, down the Shiloh system. And it was captured, as we saw on day 1. Here's an aerial view of Shiloh, and you'll notice even today, Tel Shiloh, here's our north-south watershed, it's just off of the main road to the east. The Shiloh system is over here to the west of our north-south watershed. This is the little village, Kirbet Sialun, nearby Shiloh. And I say recently, probably in the last 15, 20 years, they've done extensive excavations here at Tel Shiloh, which is on the upper left-hand corner of our picture. There's a little kibbutz there raising all kinds of things. And let's go up on Tel Shiloh. We're marching on up the hill to the top of the Tel. Here's an aerial view of Tel Shiloh. Here's the Watershed Ridge route with a car on it, fortunately, so we get a perspective. Maybe it's a truck or a bus, I can't tell. Anyway, here's the north-south route. As it heads north, Shiloh is overlooking that. More interesting to our biblical narrative is this plateau area on the top of the Tel right here, and you see this rocky outline of a long rectangular part with a smaller little square part. Very likely, very, 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 very likely that is where the tabernacle stood. And you can actually walk down there and stand in and see the tabernacle. Unfortunately, I personally have never had the opportunity to stand on Tel Shiloh, though I've driven by it 2 or 3 times. I was there before it was excavated, and then now it's in the West Bank, and there's political tensions. It's very difficult to even get up there. But probable location of the tabernacle is there. There's a little museum and all kinds of things that you can do at Tel Shiloh if you can get there. We're standing on Tel Shiloh looking down at that rocky structure outline, as it were, of the tabernacle and the Holy of Holies, where the Ark of God would have been. All right, let's move on north to Lebonah. Remember, I've mentioned Lebonah. This is where the road is going to descend down into a north-south valley, and we totally lose the watershed. All right, the town of Lebonah overlooked the road as it dropped down into the Mikmethath Valley. We're going to give that valley its name. That north-south deep valley that everything runs, the watershed ridge drops down into, is called the Mikmethath Valley. Be thankful that, unlike my students, you don't have to memorize these names. The Mikmethath Valley, and thus into the region of Samaria. Now we moved out of Ephraim into the area of Manasseh, but it eventually becomes called Samaria because this is going to be the capital of the northern tribes as time passes. We're now in the region of Samaria and on north toward the city of Shechem. Technically, Lebonah is where the region of the Jews ended in the days of Jesus. So you think of the days of Jesus, if you're traveling on the watershed ridge north, you get to Lebonah and you're still kind of in Jewish territory, but remember there are Samaritans then, who are remnants of the Assyrian captivity and all of that. And Lebonah, once you get past Lebonah heading north, you're now in Samaria, which is why Jesus, when he went down this road, met a Samaritan woman. And we'll talk about that. But once you leave Lebonah, you're down into Samaria. Behold, there's yearly feast of the Lord at Shiloh. This is in Judges 21. And I just like these geographical references because I want you to start noticing them in your Bible. Judges 21. Behold, there's a yearly feast of the Lord at Shiloh. Now we know where that is. North of Bethel. We know where that is. East of the highway that goes up from Bethel to Shechem. That's where we're headed. And south of Lebonah. I mean, you used to read that stuff. It's like, I have no idea what he's talking about, but now we know. A feast of the Lord at Shiloh. Of course, that's where the tabernacle is. We just saw the outline of that. Where is Shiloh? Well, it's north of Bethel. You've got to go from Jerusalem, to Mizpah, to Bethel, and then to Shiloh. But to get Shiloh, you've got to go east of the highway from Bethel. The highway's going up to Shechem, where you drop down into the Mikmethath Valley at Lebonah. So there they all are. It's just fun to read that, in my opinion. And here's Lebonah, where we're going to have switchbacks that are dropping down into the Mikmethath Valley. Here it is, a very deep valley, leading up to Shechem, where we're headed very soon. All right? So, some suggest that Lebonah may have been the place where Mary and Joseph camped for the night on the way from Jerusalem back to Nazareth when they discovered that young Jesus was missing from among the travelers. Remember, they took Jesus down to worship when he was 12 years old. They made their annual trek from Nazareth, way up in the Esdraelon Valley, from Nazareth down to Jerusalem. They headed back. Mary thought Jesus was with Joseph. Joseph thought Jesus was with Mary. My wife, forgive me, stories just pop in my head. My wife grew up with 9 kids in the family. They went to church 7 miles away from the farm. And guess what? They got home one day. And one of the 9, there's only 8 kids. What happened to the other one? Okay. So Mary and Joseph are heading back to Nazareth, and it's very likely, I mean, this is all supposition, but it's likely they stopped at Lebonah because that's the last Jewish town before you drop into Samaria, and then they could get to Nazareth the next day. So they get to Lebonah from Jerusalem. Remember, about 20 miles. I mean, that's quite a hike. And you know, they see each other. Hey, you know, where's Jesus? I thought he was with you. Anyway, that may have happened here. Who knows? So here's Lebonah, right next to Shiloh, just north as you are on the road. And again, we're going to drop down into the Mikmethath Valley, heading up to Shechem. And that's where we begin to get into the capital area of the northern tribes, which we'll look at in a moment. I want to show you, it's kind of a confusing picture straight down, but I want to show you the switchbacks. See the road right here going back and forth and back and forth. I mean, if you've ever traveled in Colorado or places like that, you know what switchbacks are like. And there's Lebonah overlooking. I mean, Shiloh is up here. So as you come down the road from Shiloh, you're going to drop down on these switchbacks past Lebonah into the Mikmethath Valley. This is a little closer, focused in on them, and now we're going to hop on a bus, our bus right about here, and we're going to look down. Well, actually, this is an aerial view. Now our bus is going to be right about here. We're going to look down those switchbacks. There they are. We're headed down here to this deep valley that's going to head straight north, the Mikmethath Valley, up to Shechem. Let's move on north. We've dropped down from Lebonah, down those switchbacks into the Mikmethath Valley, and now we are technically leaving Ephraim, and we're in the hill country of Samaria, which is what I call the whole area, really. The hill country of Samaria is north of the Bethel Plateau and the hills of Ephraim. The hill country of Samaria is so named because of its connection with the city of Samaria, which eventually becomes the capital of the northern tribes. The capital actually moves 3 times. Well, it's established first, that it moves 2 more times. So we'll look at those different capitals, but Samaria becomes the final capital of the northern tribes. The major cities of this region are accessed by valleys and roads that form a kind of diamond shape. Remember the Benjamin Plateau? We used a circle, a clock face. Now we're going to use a diamond shape, and that is right up here, north of Lebonah, the Mikmethath Valley, and these cities, Shechem, Tirzah, Dothan, Samaria, and back to Shechem, that diamond shape there. I'm going to liken it, forgive me, but I'm an American, to a baseball diamond, with Shechem here at home plate, Tirzah at first, Dothan at second, who's on third, right? Samaria on third, back to Shechem. So let's try to get a control of this region up here by thinking about this diamond shape. Here we are, Shechem, Tirzah, Dothan, and Samaria. And of course, these roads are going to follow valleys as much as possible. We've lost the watershed ridge. We're following valleys to get from one city to the other. All right, Shechem, let's start at home plate. Shechem is 50 miles now north of Jerusalem. It's central to the area. Remember, Abraham stopped at Shechem on his way down to the Negev into the land of promise. He stopped at Shechem, and Shechem is found quite often in Scripture. From Lebonah, the Mikmethath Valley drops northward, eventually emptying into the Wadis Beda and Faria, just east of Shechem. And again, forgive me for mentioning all of these wadis and nahals. My students have to memorize them. But I think they're helpful for you to see a map and to look at Google Earth. And I mean, these are the things that define the geography, the topography, right? Are these valleys that are cut by water systems. So here's Shechem, dropping down from Shiloh and Bethel at Lebonah into the Mikmethath Valley, which itself then is kind of a water system draining into the Wadi Beda, this deep little finger of the Wadi Faria. It's emptying into the Wadi Faria, which runs down to the Jordan Rift and the Jordan River. Okay, so this little Wadi Beda runs into the Wadi Faria, running out to the Jordan River. And those are really kind of going to define everything that's happening here, running from the Mikmethath Valley into Beda, down Faria, and out. That water system defines where everybody's traveling and where these cities are going to be. You can really see it pretty clearly on our satellite imagery. The Mikmethath Valley, leading down to Shechem, this deep Wadi Beda right here, and the long, deep Wadi Faria running down to the Jordan River. Notice with all my stuff gone now, you can see it very clearly. Mikmethath Valley, this deep little Wadi Beda running into Faria, and all the way down to the Jordan. Okay, so Shechem is situated between two hills, Mount Ebal on the north and Mount Gerizim on the south. These are important hills in the Bible. They're mentioned in the Bible. Joshua built an altar on Mount Ebal in accordance with Moses' instructions. When the hill country was conquered, Joshua brought, according to the instructions of Moses, Joshua brought Israel up here to Shechem and built an altar on Mount Ebal. Remember, then he put half of the people on Mount Ebal, half of the people on Mount Gerizim, and they rehearsed back and forth, kind of an antiphonal choir across this valley. They had rehearsed the blessings and the curses of the law. If you obey, God will bless you in this way, bless you in this way, bless you in this way. If you disobey, God will curse you in this way, curse you in this way, curse you in this way. Deuteronomy 28:29. That's happening here at Shechem, Mount Ebal and Mount Gerizim. The Samaritans, once the Assyrians conquered this region, the Assyrians deported half of the population and imported foreigners from other populations so that these people would intermarry and lose their ethnic identity. And so the people in this area by Jesus' day were married, mixed breed people that were somewhat despised by the Jews because they weren't full-blooded Jewish people. They were Samaritans. They were like half Jews, but half something else. And they started their own religion, the Samaritans, and they worshiped up on Mount Gerizim. And in fact, today, Samaritans still worship on Mount Gerizim. And they sacrifice animals, blood sacrifices of animals. Today, they feel that they are more faithful to Judaism in a way than the Jews, though they are only half-breeds, so to speak. But they were despised by the Jewish people in Jesus' day. So there's Shechem with Mount Ebal and Mount Gerizim right smack in between the two, next to the Mikmethath Valley, very near the Wadi Beda. Here's an aerial view, a satellite view of Tel Shechem is right here with Mount Ebal and Mount Gerizim. Abraham first stopped at Shechem and built an altar here before proceeding to Bethel, that is the hill between Bethel and Ai, as we just saw. Jacob purchased land near Shechem, where Dinah was defiled and avenged by her brothers. Very interesting story. The 12 tribes assembled here after the conquest, as we just mentioned. They interred Joseph's bones here because he wanted to be brought back from Egypt and buried in the land of promise. This is where he was buried. Gideon's son Abimelech made himself king here. So remember, they came to Gideon after he had defeated the Midianites, and they said, we want to make you king. And he said, well, God's your king. They didn't have kings yet. It's the period of the judges. And, God's your king. I don't want to be your king. And we admire Gideon for his humility. But later he makes an ephod. So he kind of makes himself a priest. And he has a son who wants to make himself king. And his son's name is Abimelech. Now, I talked about the name Abimelech on day one, which you probably don't remember, but the name Abimelech, Avi, is father. Av is father, Avi is my father, Melech is king. So Gideon said, no, I'm not going to be your king. God is your king. But he makes an ephod and makes himself a priest, and he names his son, my father is king, Abimelech. So, we all have our flaws and we all get big heads. And if you people say too many nice things to me this week, I'll think I'm a fantastic teacher and everybody should listen to me. No, I'll try to be humble and not make an ephod and name my son Abimelech. But anyway, so Jeroboam, when Jeroboam split the tribes off of Rehoboam after Solomon, this is the first capital. This is the first capital of the northern kingdom. This is a great view. We're looking west toward the Mediterranean Sea, way out there in the distance in the coastal plain. And here's Mount Ebal, and here's Mount Gerizim, the Mikmethath Valley, and here's Tel Shechem, right there. All right, so this is a great view of Shechem, Mount Ebal, and Mount Gerizim. And I think in the next slide, I'm not 100% sure, but we're going to park our bus right down here, and we're going to take a picture this way into the Shechem system and look at Ebal and Gerizim from the ground. Let's see if that happens. Hey, I was right. So I have been able, by the grace of God, to get up there a few times. It's very difficult to get there because of the political tensions, but we are parked kind of outside on the road in the Mikmethath Valley that's heading north and south, and Tel Shechem is over in here somewhere, and here is Mount Ebal, and here is Mount Gerizim. And if we kept driving down this valley to the west, we would eventually get to the area of Caesarea, down there on the coast. We've turned to the right. There's Mount Ebal, where Joshua built his altar. At that time, Joshua built an altar to the Lord of God on Mount Ebal, as Moses, servant of the Lord, had commanded the people of Israel. They offered on it burnt offerings to the Lord, sacrificed peace offerings there in the presence of the people of Israel. He wrote on stones a copy of the law of Moses, which he had written. And I forget the dates. I forget dates easily. But I'm going to say back in the 80s, some excavators went up on Mount Ebal, and they actually found what they believed to be the altar, or the altar area of Joshua's altar on Mount Ebal. They also eventually found, I don't know if the same people at the same time, place, or whatever, but they found a standing stone. Let me read this verse, Deuteronomy. This is Moses talking about the future. When you conquer the land, Moses said, on the day you cross over the Jordan to the land the Lord God is giving you, you shall set up large stones. These are called standing stones. There were actually some down on Gezer when we looked at the ruins there. I didn't talk about them then, but this is a common thing. Standing stones. Set up a large stone, plaster them with plaster, write on them all the words of this law. Set up these stones. Mount Ebal, you shall plaster them with plaster. You shall build an altar to the Lord your God of uncut stones and offer burnt offerings on it to the Lord your God. That's Moses' instruction to Joshua. Joshua 24, so Joshua made a covenant with the people that day, put in place the statutes and the rules for them at Shechem, and Joshua wrote these words in the book of the law of God, and he took a large stone and set it up there under the terebinth tree that was by the sanctuary of the Lord. So they'd set up these huge stones, they'd plastered them with plaster so that they could write on them these memorial words. And at Shechem, they found a standing stone that is plastered, at least a piece of it. And this is actually very large. And I don't remember if we had a person standing there, this would probably be about 6 or 8 feet, if I remember correctly. Now we're looking up at Mount Gerizim, and this is where the Samaritans still worship to this day. And here are some of the ruins of Shechem down there in the valley. They have found, well, let me read John 4, because this is important. Now we're in the days of Jesus. Jesus met a Samaritan woman. Remember when Jesus was traveling back up to the Galilee region from Jerusalem, he said, we must needs go through Samaria, which was pretty unusual. Usually if you're going north from Jerusalem, you would go down to the Jordan Rift to avoid Samaria, or you'd go down to the coastal plain to avoid Samaria. Jesus says, we're going to go through Samaria. His disciples are going, not sure that's a great idea. But anyway, he stopped at a well, which we'll look at in a minute, talk about it in a minute, and he met a woman. And she says, sir, I perceive that you are a prophet. Our fathers worship on this mountain. And she pointed up at Mount Gerizim. Our fathers worship on this mountain, but you say in Jerusalem is the place where people ought to worship. And that opened up a spiritual conversation, which eventually led him to show her that he was, in fact, the Messiah. Again, some of the ruins at Tel Shechem. This building they identify as the Temple of Baal, mentioned in Judges 9. This is where funds were taken to finance Abimelech, the son of Gideon, to finance his claim to kingship. Gideon didn't claim it, theoretically, but Abimelech tried to make himself king. And this is where the citizens took refuge against Abimelech's attack. And if I remember correctly, he burned this building on them or something. I can't remember. The gates of Shechem, which may very well date back to the days of Jacob, and certainly the main gate in the days of Abimelech. So it's just amazing to be able to go to these places if you can get there. It's very difficult now, but and stand in these places where these biblical events took place. They're just very ancient and incredibly significant. Of course, Jesus met the Samaritan woman at Jacob's well just outside of Sychar, which is very near Shechem. It's like one of the daughters of Shechem. Remember, I talked about the villages around these major cities. And Sychar was one of the villages very near Shechem, and this is where all of the women would come to draw water in John chapter 4. Jesus left Judea, right, Jerusalem area, departed again for Galilee, and he had to pass through Samaria. That was God's providential walk for him that time back up to Galilee. So he came to a village of Samaria called Sychar, near the field that Jacob had given to his son Joseph. Jacob's well was there. Remember, you need water, and you can get water from rainfall. You can get water from springs. If you can't get it from any of those, you got to dig down to an impermeable layer, and you've got to find water from a well. Abraham dug wells all over the Negev trying to find water. Anyway, Jacob dug a well, and it's still there in Jesus' day. And so Jesus, because he was tired from his journey, was sitting on the well about the 6th hour. He had sent the disciples into town for some food, and a woman of Samaria came to draw water. Jesus said to her, "Give me a drink," for his disciples, there it is, had gone to the village to buy food. Back when I first ever went to this area, of course, a church is built over Jacob's well. And when I first went to this area, this church, for some reason that I cannot remember, was unfinished. It sat like this, unfinished, for years and years and years and years and years. And you could go visit Jacob's well, and you'd go down the stairs in one of these little things here. The well is underneath the church. Everything pretty much. I mean, here's the way I like to say it. If you want to walk where Jesus walked in Jerusalem, you've got to go down about 30 feet from the surface of what's there now, because all of this has over time, been destroyed and buried and all that kind of stuff. So anyway, you would go down the stairs and you could see Jacob's well and come back up. In this unfinished, it was a very beautiful unfinished church. Here it is. We see Mount Ebal there through the windows, the unfinished windows. And you'd go down one of these, one's down and one's up, and you could go down, and there's a little guy down there who'll give you a sip of water from Jacob's well. I told my people, please don't drink the water from Jacob's well. Now, as far as the claim to, is this Jacob's well? It could very well be. I mean, there aren't a whole lot of ancient wells around, Shechem. And so this very well might be Jacob's well. We don't know. Now, there is this huge, beautiful church there. I remember reading a news account once. I was like, what is this? They finished that church. And apparently, I've never seen this. It's a big, huge, beautiful church that you can enter, built over Jacob's well, but you still have to go down in the basement. Here we are in the basement. Here's the well. And if you wish, I don't recommend it, but you can drink out of the same cup the last 1,000, 2,000 tourists drank out of, water that how long it's been there. I don't know. But anyway, don't drink the water, but you do need to see Jacob's well if you can. All right. That's Shechem, Mount Ebal, Mount Gerizim, the first capital of the northern tribes. Okay. First capital. The second capital is going to be Tirzah. Where is Tirzah? Tirzah is up there at first base. If Shechem is home plate, we're moving on our diamond up to the northeast to Tirzah, 7 miles northeast of Shechem. There it is, at first base on our diamond. Here's our satellite map. Here's Shechem. Here's Tirzah. This deep rift right here is the Wadi Beda, a little finger of the Wadi Faria, which is running all the way down to the Jordan Rift. And you see a road today. It's going next to, it's hugging the hills to avoid the Wadi Beda. It's hugging the hills here between Shechem and Tirzah. All right, 7 miles away. There's Tirzah. The capital moved from Shechem to Tirzah under Jeroboam. So, he started at Shechem, but he moved it eventually to Tirzah, probably because Tirzah is a little more accessible, north, south, east, west. It doesn't really tell us, I don't believe, why he moved it there. But it remained there under Jeroboam until Baasha, Zimri, and into the reign of Omri. Omri is going to move it eventually to Samaria. So this is the second capital from Shechem to Tirzah. Although Tirzah was not on an international thoroughfare, travel to and from Tirzah moved rather easily in every direction of the compass. So, we've already moved from Shechem to Tirzah. You can keep going north through the Bezek Pass up to the Valley of Ezra-Elon. You can go southeast down to the Jordan Rift, or you can go northwest up to the Dothan Pass, which leads into the Ezra-Elon Valley, north, south, east, west, at least north, west, southeast, and so forth. From Tirzah, it's relatively easy to travel, though this isn't international travel, generally speaking. though at times international people are traveling through there for various reasons. Here's Tel Tirzah. Again, ruins everywhere you go. From Tirzah south, you travel next to the Wadi Beta back down to Shechem. So let's be right over Tirzah. We're looking back to Shechem. Here's the Mikmethath Valley. Here's that deep Wadi Beta running into Faria, and the road from Tirzah to Shechem hugs the edge of the Wadi Beta, so you can travel south to Shechem and then the Mikmethath Valley to Lebonah and down to the rest of Israel, right? And Judah. That's our road south from Tirzah, the capital, the new capital. From Tirzah to go southeast, you're going to go down the Wadi Faria. It's a very broad valley leading down to the Jordan Rift, emptying into the Jordan River very near what's called the Alexandrium, which we'll look at in just a moment. We're standing on Tirzah. Sorry, it's a cloudy, rainy day, which they love in Israel. And we're looking down the Wadi Faria southeast toward the Alexandrium and the Jordan Rift. Okay, so this is getting us down to the Jordan Rift where we can travel north and south very easily down this very broad valley called Wadi Faria. We're looking now back in our satellite view. Here's Shechem, here's Tirzah, here's the Wadi Faria, which is heading down to the Jordan River. It's also going to head on northeast to Dothan, which will be at second base, which we'll look at in a minute. All right. So if we go from Tirzah down the Wadi Faria, right when we get to the Jordan River, we're going to see up to the right, way up on a hill, something called the Alexandrium. And I mention it not because it's in the Bible, but because the Alexandrium, I might have a note here on it. The Alexandrium is a twin to the Herodium. Remember the Herodium outside of Bethel, that artificial volcano-looking thing with palaces in it and so forth. East, down the Wadi Faria from Tirzah, is the Alexandrium. This fortress, originally fortified by the Hasmoneans in the 1st century, was later restored by Herod the Great as a twin, as it were, to the Herodium in Judah. Although this Herodium-like structure is way up on the top of a mountain down there by the Jordan Rift. It dominates the north-south Jordan Rift Road, as well as the entrance to the Wadi Faria, accessing the capitals up there in Samaria. So here's the Wadi Faria from Tirzah, here's the Jordan River, and up on this southwest corner, up on a very high hill, is the Alexandrium, and I mention it simply because we also looked at the Herodium. I mentioned that there are like 3 other or maybe 4 other structures like the Herodium that Herod built in his phobia that, you know, I might need to hide in this place if somebody tries to take over my kingdom. This is our satellite view. There's Tirzah, Shechem, and here's the Wadi Faria. And up on this hill is the Alexandrium. From the road down below, it's way up there, and that's basically the only picture I'm going to show you, but it's very much like the Herodium. All right, let's go back to Tirzah, and from Tirzah, we're going to travel northeast into the Valley of Esdraelon through Bezek. Okay, Bezek governed the road. We're at Tirzah, and we're trying to figure out how you can go north, south, east, west from Tirzah, the capital, right? We've looked south to Shechem. We've looked east, as it were, to the Jordan River. Now, how do we get north? Well, we're going to travel through the Bezek Pass. Bezek governed the road from Tirzah through a pass cut by the Nahal, the river Bezek, that leads northeast from Tirzah to the eastern mouth of the Esdraelon Valley. Remember, the Esdraelon Valley is that major valley that all the nations of the world are funneling into. So it's the next region we're going to look at. It's my second favorite region. And in order to get from the capital of the northern tribes, which is now Tirzah, to get from that capital, basically the most easy way to get to the rest of the world is going to be through the Bezek Pass, which is going to lead you into the Valley of Esdraelon, which is going to lead you on north to the rest of the world. It's kind of going to be the way you connect, as it were, to the Via Maris, the international road. So this is an important little pass. Here's Tirzah, here's Bezek, and once you get through the Bezek Pass, as it were, you're at the mouth of the Esdraelon Valley by the Jordan River there, which is where all the nations of the world are traveling. So let's stand at Tirzah again. We're standing on the capital ruins, and we're looking down this cut right here that if we go through, we're going to head northeast to the mouth of the Esdraelon Valley. Here's our satellite imagery, which gives us an aerial kind of view. Tirzah is right here. Here's the Nahal Bezek. There's Bezek itself. And now we begin to see the mouth of the Esdraelon Valley and the Jordan River in the distance. And there goes our road to, as it were, the rest of the world. The Valley of Jezreel is where we're headed next again. And as I said a moment ago, this is where all the nations of the world are traveling to get from the coast through the Megiddo Pass, which we'll look at in a few minutes. The Megiddo Pass in our next session. We'll look at the Megiddo Pass across to the Sea of Galilee and north. So all the world is traveling here. And now the capital of the northern tribes, this is how you're going to get into the Esdraelon Valley. So you now can also travel north to the rest of the world. All right? That's the Bezek Pass. Here's again an aerial view closer to the tell of Bezek. Easily see the pass that's cut by the Nahal to the mouth of the Esdraelon Valley. This little pin right here is going to be Beth Shan. For those of you who know this region and have been to this area, Beth Shan is a controlling city at the mouth of the Esdraelon Valley. All right, the Bezek Pass. Judah took Bezek from the Canaanites in Judges 1. Saul numbered his troops at Bezek before he crossed the Jordan to fight against Jabesh Gilead, which is over in Transjordan, 1 Samuel. All right, so we've seen Shechem, we've seen Tirzah at first base. Let's move to second base, Dothan. Dothan never was a capital city, but it's a very important Old Testament biblical city. Let's look at Dothan up there at second base on our diamond. Dothan controlled the Dothan Pass. It's really a very broad, fertile pass that leads into the heart of the Esdraelon Valley. Remember, the Bezek Pass led to the mouth of the Esdraelon Valley, the eastern mouth. The Dothan Pass is going to lead right into the heart, the very heart of the Esdraelon Valley, right in the middle. From Dothan, the road led southeast to Tirzah or southwest to Samaria. So again, we want to just kind of connect our bases, as it were. We've moved northwest from Tirzah, again, along the Wadi Faria, as its headwaters up here, so to speak, as it narrows to Dothan, and a very broad pass here that's going to lead right into the heart of the Esdraelon Valley here at the Dothan Pass. So you can go from Dothan southeast to Tirzah or Dothan southwest to Samaria, connecting our diamond shape here. We're at second base, so to speak. Dothan to Tirzah, Dothan to Samaria, or north into the heart of the Esdraelon Valley. Here's Tel Dothan and the Dothan Pass and the heart here of the Esdraelon Valley. Let's see if all of that disappears so I can show it to you. Notice this broad valley here, the Dothan Pass. Here's Tel Dothan, and this flat area here, broad flat area, is in fact the heart of the Esdraelon Valley, which we'll study next. This northwest, southeast running valley and Dothan. From Dothan to Tirzah, here's Dothan, There's Tirzah, the Wadi Faria. It's kind of its headwaters up here as it heads toward the Alexandrium and the Jordan Rift. This is going to be the way you travel from Dothan back to the capital, Tirzah. There's Samaria, the pin for home plate there in the distance. All right, let's look at from Dothan to Samaria, our next city. Dothan to Samaria to the southeast. This is a little, quite a bit, I guess I would say, less defined. It's very hard to know where that road runs because there's no nice valley there. You run into some broken mountains and so forth. But you can get from Dothan to Samaria, and Samaria is going to be the final capital of the northern tribes. Joseph sought his brothers both in Shechem. Okay, so Jacob, right? Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, Joseph. The sons have gone to shepherd the flocks, and they've got to shepherd them wherever the grass is. If it's the dry season, you're going to head what direction to find more moisture? You're going to head north, right? Because the grass isn't growing in the south, there's not enough moisture. So as the season changes, your flocks are going to move all the way from down there in Judah. They're shepherding their flocks all the way up into Shechem. And he gets to Shechem to find his brothers, and he can't find them there. And they say, oh, they went on up to Dothan. And so he goes clear up here to Dothan, obviously up to Tirzah and over to Dothan. And he finds his brothers with the flocks. And they see their brother coming, and they don't like him because he's had these weird dreams where they're all bowing down to him, and so they're going to kill him. But Judah says, no, we can't do that. They throw him in a pit to decide what they're going to do with him. And here come some Midianites, and he sells them into slavery because the Midianites are going to Egypt. Okay, now stop with me for a minute, class. And we have Midianites coming from the north, the northeast, and they're going to Egypt. And I ask myself, now that I know geography a little bit, it's like, why are they going to Egypt through the Dothan Pass? That's kind of a hard way to get there. Wouldn't it be better to go through what pass? From Israel and through the Megiddo Pass, right? Down there to the coast. Why are they going through Dothan to get to Egypt? And we're not told. So we have to guess. But remember, politics and military and all of that stuff, it could be as the Midianites are trading with Egypt and they're going from the north and northeast through the Israel Valley, and they're trying to get to Egypt, who controls the Megiddo Pass? That'd be the logical way to go. It'd be the easiest way to go. But what if their enemy controls the Megiddo Pass? Or what if Governor Walz from Minnesota controls that pass, and he's going to charge you taxes on everything you want to sell to Egypt? He's going to charge you a tariff on all that stuff. Well, we're good friends with the guy who's governing Dothan, so let's go through Dothan. It's harder, it's more difficult to get to Egypt through the Dothan Pass, but here they are traveling to Egypt through the Dothan Pass. They buy this slave boy to take to Egypt so they can sell him. So anyway, Joseph found his brothers here, but he was sold into slavery from Dothan. More interesting, and I love this story. And I've been to Dothan actually just one time, but I loved seeing Dothan because this is the story I had in my brain as I stood there and looked at this place. Elisha was surrounded by Syrians at Dothan. The Syrians wanted to destroy Elisha, but God opened the eyes of his servant to see God's army, and God's army smote the Syrians with blindness in 2 Kings 6. As that story begins in 2 Kings 6, the king of Syria is fighting against the king of Israel, the northern tribes. Syria and the northern tribes are at it with each other, and the king of Syria is waging war against the king of Israel. But every time the king of Syria wages war, his plans are foiled. He can't figure out why tribes of Israel, the kingdom of Israel, always knows where he's going to attack or how he's going to do this. And so the king of Syria thought there was a spy among his men. Time and time again, Israel seemed to know what his secret plans were, and he's frustrated by that, and he says to his servants, "Who's the spy? You guys surely know who the spy is among us." And here's what they say, 2 Kings 6. One of his servants said, "None, my lord, there's no spy here, but Elisha, the prophet in Israel, tells the king of Israel the words that you speak in your bedroom." In other words, this prophet knows somehow God is telling him what your plans are. Your most secret plans are being told to the king of Israel by the prophet Elijah. And so the king of Syria says, "Go see where he is, send and seize him." And they said, "Behold, he's in Dothan." Oh. So there's Tel Dothan, this huge hill right here overlooking this beautiful pass into Esdraelon. So the king of Syria sent to Dothan horses, chariots, a great army to get one guy, Elisha. And they came by night and surrounded the city. And the servant of Elisha rose early in the morning and went out. And here's the army of Syria, horses, chariots all around the city. And the servant wakes up Elisha and says, "Alas, master, what shall we do? We're doomed. They're here after you." There's Dothan and the hills around it, and now the Syrian army has surrounded them, and they're trapped, and they're captured, and Elijah's surely going to die. And Elisha says, "Don't be afraid. Those who are with us are more than those who are with them." And Elisha prayed and said, "Lord, please open the eyes that my servant might see." And the Lord opened the eyes of the young man, and he saw, and behold, the hill country around Elisha was full of horses and chariots of fire. The army of God had surrounded the army of Syria. There they are, all around the Syrians who are all around Dothan. I mean, wouldn't you like to have been standing there to see that? That's Elisha's great faith, and I love thinking about that story as I sit on this road. There's a road right out here going through the Dothan Pass, and we're looking up now at Tel Dothan. This looks like to me a vehicle right here with its lights on. So again, I mean, these are huge, huge mounds where these cities were. Also, look at what's right in front of you. Dark, rich soil, right? We're farther north, moisture. You can grow stuff. That's why Jacob's brothers were pasturing their flocks up here in the Dothan Pass. Very broad, very fertile, a very important area leading into the Valley of Esdraelon. But this is where that took place. And I just can imagine Elisha's servant standing on this hill and looking out and seeing the host of God all around the Syrian army. And the Syrian army is struck with blindness, and it's not a problem. We're looking now, we've just turned around and looked the other way. I want to show you the breadth of the Dothan Pass and the greenness and the fertility as we look on toward the west, the Dothan Valley. All right, let's go to third base, to Samaria, 11 miles southwest of Dothan, 7 miles west of Shechem at home plate there, 25 miles from the coast. And if we followed the Shechem Valley on to the west, we would actually come out very near Caesarea on the coast. So we're about 25 miles from Caesarea down there on the coast. That's Samaria. And Samaria is going to be the last, it's going to be the final capital of the northern tribes. Here's Dothan and the pass where we just were. We just looked at this broad, fertile valley from Tel Dothan leading up to Esdraelon. If you head southwest, you get to Samaria, which is 7 miles from Shechem, home plate where we started, 11 miles from Dothan. If you traveled on down the Shechem system, you're going to come to the coast down here. There's the Mediterranean Sea, just about at Caesarea, and that's about 25 miles away. East-west travel follows the Nahal River Shechem. So that valley between Ebal and Gerizim, we saw Shechem, and the valley keeps going, and that's dropping down from the watershed ridge down towards Caesarea. So everything from Shechem to Samaria down to Caesarea is all following the Nahal Shechem that basically cut that pass. Travel north from Samaria is going to enter the Dothan Pass, as we just saw, and then into the very heart of the Esdraelon Valley. So north to Dothan from Samaria, and there's our road. Here's Samaria, Tel Samaria, there's Tel Dothan. As I said, it's not really easy to define that road. I'm not even 100% sure that I've drawn my line where that road would have been, because it does run into these mountains here, and I'm not sure exactly where it would have crossed. But in any case, from Samaria to Dothan, north as it were, and then to the Esdraelon Valley, or from Samaria to Shechem, down the Shechem system. So we're looking back to home plate where we started, in the Wadi Beta, the Wadi Faria, Tirzah, and all of that. Pretty easy to get from Samaria to the old capital, the original capital, Shechem, along the Nahal Shechem. Omri is the one who moved the capital to Samaria. He kind of just built a whole new city. He built a whole new city kind of in honor of himself. This is going to be our beautiful capital. And he's the one who moved the capital here to Samaria from Tirzah, 1 Kings 16. A lot of things happened here. God delivered Ahab from Assyrian siege in 1 Kings 20. Jehoshaphat of Judah and Ahab of Israel initiated the battle of Ramoth Gilead from Samaria. We don't have time to think about and look at all these stories. Elisha led the blinded Syrians here. Remember when the army of the host surrounded the Syrians and blinded them? Elisha, came down to them and they said, "Where's Elisha?" And he said, "They're blind. They don't know who this guy is. Could you show us where Elisha is?" He said, "Yeah, I'll show you." And he takes them to Samaria, the capital, and their blindness leaves and they find out they're right in the middle of the capital and they're basically captured. That this is where he led the blinded Syrians in 2 Kings 6. This is also where God miraculously ended another Syrian siege in 2 Kings 6, though Samaria was eventually conquered by Shalmaneser. I believe that's 2 Kings 6. Syria had besieged Samaria. They were starving them out. If you couldn't break through the city, if you couldn't build a siege ramp, you couldn't get into the walls, then what you just did is you just encircled them so nobody could get in or out, and you just stay there and stay there and stay there until they run out of food and water and they surrender. And it got to that point, everybody was so hungry and starving, and that there were a bunch of lepers outside the city, and they said, "You know what, we're dying anyway of hunger. We might as well just go down to the Syrian camp and see if they'll give us some food." And they went down to the Syrian camp, and what did they find? Everybody had fled. Everybody was gone. It's like, man, here's all the food we want. They stuffed themselves. They're putting money in their pockets, and they're, having a grand party. They say, "You know what? Maybe we ought to go tell everybody else that there's stuff down here." And they came out, and the Syrians were gone, and the siege was over. That's the story in 2 Kings 6. If you remember, eventually Samaria was conquered by Shalmaneser of Assyria, annihilated by Sargon II in 721. The northern tribes are no more. Half of them are deported. Other conquered people are imported to replace those half. They begin to intermarry, and now the northern tribes are no more. Just Judah exists. And the Samaritans are born, the half-breed Jews. That's why that happened after the conquest by and the deportation by the Assyrians in 721. All right, so it is the last capital because they are conquered and destroyed. Later in New Testament times, nearer New Testament times, Herod the Great rebuilt Samaria. So there are some beautiful Roman ruins. I mean, what's Herod the Great? Talk about Governor Walls spending money and doing stuff, right? I mean, Herod the Great is building all over the place, and you can see these Roman ruins. We'll see more of them later today. Beautiful, beautiful cities. Here's Tel Samaria. Let's drive up to the top. As we drive up onto the Tel, you begin to see some walls and towers, and you see these stones that have the smooth margins with the rough middles. Those stones are very much Herodian. So when archaeologists see that, they say, oh, this is Roman. This is Herodian stuff. And we're going to see that in Jerusalem, for example, on the Temple Mount. And so this is part of the Herodian rebuilding of Samaria. Colonnaded streets, that's very Roman. So we're driving up onto Samaria. By the way, see these rocks here? These didn't just fall there. Those are speed bumps. They didn't make speed bumps, but if you're going to take a bus there, you got to go around these and around those. Makes you slow down, okay? Anyway, those are Arab speed bumps as you go up onto Samaria. Roman ruins. I mean, if you look for Roman ruins, what are you going to look for? A theater. There's always going to be a theater there, and they discovered that. These ruins, as you look down into them, these are the ruins of the Israelites, called the Israelite Acropolis and Palace. Remember, Omri built this city. This is his palace area, and later Ahab and Jezebel, this is their palace. I remember being here, and we're given the lesson, and we're standing on the talking about it, and our guide moves on to show the next thing. It's like, man, this is Ahab and Jezebel's palace. And so I walk down in there, and you're standing in this place, and it's just unbelievable. As I said, the beginning of the week, you go to Philadelphia and you see Independence Hall. It's like 250 years ago or whatever it was. And then you go here and you stand in Ahab and Jezebel's palace. It's just an amazing experience. If you ever have the opportunity, I highly, highly recommend visiting these ancient sites. A Herodian temple was built up on this, steps, and then a huge temple area in New Testament times. Look down off and you see pillars on this flattened area. That would have been the Roman hippodrome where they had their horse races and so forth. All kinds of things to see, and here's where we're going to end this morning. We're standing on Samaria, and now we're looking back toward the original capital. Remember, at Shechem. Shechem is down below between Ebal and Gerizim, and you can stand on Samaria, and this is actually telephoto. It looks closer than you would think, but you can see Mount Ebal from Samaria, which takes us back to the original capital. And now we have conquered in our minds, in our geography class, the hills and the valleys of Samaria. Shechem, Tirzah, Dothan, and back to Shechem.